What is an OBE, or out-of-body experience? Is it a trick of the mind, or just a weird dream? Some people have experienced an OBE after a serious accident, or during an operation where their heart had stopped beating. Other people have trained their mind through meditation, where they are able to leave their bodies at will and travel through solid objects and can go anywhere just by thought. Others have even travelled into space. You become a free soul, but you are still alive. The following 3 stories are about people who had an OBE. Dan Freyssnet. Dan, an Eaton therapist and OBE practitioner, claims that the following incident was totally unplanned and happened around 3 a.m. He woke up in the kitchen, where he found he was out of his body. However, this did not come as a shock to him, as he had been out of his body on many occasions. This time, however, he decided to run an experiment he had previously planned whilst in his body. He would go to a shopping mall that was close by and check on cars left overnight in the parking lot. Then he would memorize some license plates, come back into his body, write everything down, drive back to the mall, and compare the notes with the facts. As he was making his way out of the door, his 5-year-old daughter, also out of her body, caught up with him and followed him. Then them both flew down to the mall. It was real fun to fly together and try to catch each other. As they arrived at the mall, he forgot everything about his original plan and simply kept playing with his daughter. They went through walls, into the mall, and kept chasing each other through the stores, flying through the clothes racks and various windows. They were having lots of fun, just like kids enjoying the moment. As they zoomed out of a store onto the second floor, 2 guards with a dog were walking on the first floor below them. They were easy to see as the second floor was totally open over the main mall area. Suddenly, the dog went crazy. It started barking and yanking on its leash, pulling towards them, staring and barking towards the mall ceiling where they were. The guards must have been concerned by this and started walking in their direction, following the dog. Their enjoyment immediately disappeared, as if iced water had been poured down their backs. He said to his daughter, "Let's go back home." As they flew through the ceiling, he lost his awareness. He woke up the next day around 7 a.m. and started writing about his night experience and wondered whether he had just dreamt it all. Suddenly, his daughter ran into the room, jumped on his bed, laughing and giggling. "Wasn't it fun to play tag through the mall? I loved to fly. Why was the dog so mean? Can we do it again?" His OBE was verified. His daughter had remembered. If she had not brought it up, he wasn't even thinking about asking her about it. He assumed she would not remember. He would not have even been sure whether he hadn't made up her presence. But this little exercise proved that his OBE, along with his daughter, actually happened. It also proved that animals do sense when spirits are present. Andrew Clover. On a wet Tuesday evening, Andrew was in a panic, frantically cleaning up a very messy kitchen and was expecting his wife home at any moment. She'd been away for 2 days. Suddenly the phone rang, and it was his wife telling him that she'd be home in about half an hour. But Andrew was in a bit of a quandary because in a few minutes, his eldest 12-year-old daughter Grace would be getting off the bus, and he wanted to pick her up, but he didn't want to leave his 6-year-old daughter Iris home by herself. He called his wife back to ask her what to do, but no answer. He was in a panic. He then asked his 10-year-old daughter Cassidy to look after her young sister as he went out to pick up Grace. As he shut out the door, he decided to take a shortcut through the backyard. Unfortunately, the yard was full of puddles and he was not wearing the right shoes. He was about to go back and change into better shoes, but then decided against it and continued on the wet ground. As he was attempting to access both a large puddle and a tree branch, his trousers became snagged and he fell hard on the ground, hitting his head on a rock. Then he found that he was not only knocked out, but he'd been knocked out of his body. He could see himself lying face down in the puddle. He was filled with terror, and not only the sight of his own self on the ground, but was worried about his daughters. But he was no sooner looking down at himself than in a flash he was in the village. He could see that Grace had gotten off the bus and was safe. Then in another flash he was back at home. His middle daughter had left the living room and was walking down the hallway with a hairbrush, getting ready for bed. So she was safe. He went into the living room and found Iris fast asleep on the sofa. He could see that she had a runny nose and looked unwell. Then he suddenly found himself reviewing a series of incidences of his life with his daughter Iris. He had recently taken her to Disneyland in Paris, where now he could see them checking into the hotel. Then he was reviewing the whole time they'd spent in Disneyland. Now he was seeing the games they played together and saw her as a toddler. She was sitting in a high chair and blowing raspberries. He then started to feel terribly sad, thinking how much he will miss her. At the same time, he felt light, as if he were floating away, backwards and upwards. He then opened his eyes and saw himself swimming up through warm water. He saw sparkling light and felt a wonderful peace. Then a warm and friendly voice said, "You can't be here now." Suddenly he felt very, very sick and felt himself being dragged down. And then, bang, he was back. He could feel his body hanging heavily around him, covered in mud. "Be here," said the voice, and he felt a prod in his back. The next thing he knew, he was crawling out of the muddy backyard, choking and coughing, but at the same time, felt a strange calm. He was still on his hands and knees, but very shaky. As he looked around him, everything appeared beautiful and very alive. Then Grace appeared. "Are you okay?" she asked. He replied that he'd just slipped in the mud. He said that he'd bumped his head and then got up. He looked at her but didn't know what to say. He realized that one of the things he would miss from his life was being one-to-one with his daughters. Andrew was still unsure what had happened. Was it spiritual or physiological? He was technically dead, during which time someone spoke to him. But who? Or did he just give himself a big bang on the head, during which time a few thoughts flashed through his head? Whatever that voice was, he found it loving and comforting. He then walked back to the house with his young daughter, feeling happy. Brian. When Brian was 7 years old, he was playing up in a tree in his backyard. He then slipped and fell out of the tree and landed on his back, while at the same time striking his head on a tree root. The next thing he knew, he was standing up and dusting off his clothes. His mother quickly ran from the house, screaming for his father. Brian could not see what the fuss was all about, and was just about to tell her that he was okay when he suddenly looked down and saw himself lying motionless on the ground. He then stood back and watched his mother as she knelt over his body, gently stroking his face. He abruptly woke up and saw her leaning over, looking down at him. Today, 23 years later, Brian feels that this experience had opened his mind up to things which most people would be skeptical about and would not believe.